Welcome back to the official timeline of Final Fantasy X Spira, leading up to the events of Final Fantasy X. This is the second video in this series, and if you didn't watch the first video about Spira approximately 3,000 years ago, check that one out first by clicking the link in the description or the card popping up in the corner right now. This video, however, will continue with the timeline from 1,000 years onward. Without further ado, let us begin. We then fast forward to 1,000 years ago on the timeline. Zanarkand, mainly using summoning as a method of combat, fights with Machina-armed Bevel. The translation further expands that both are Machina civilizations, but Bevel has the edge. This also echoes the earlier point about Len fighting on the front lines, but Final Fantasy X-2 expands her story, giving us a closer look at her romance with Shuyan. More importantly, it reveals that Bevel had its own answer to sin, Vegnagun, a colossal Machina weapon designed for war. However, its inability to distinguish friend from foe led to its abandonment, sealed away in the Farplane. Ironically, this same indiscriminate destruction would later define sin, whether by accident or design. It's easy to imagine a world where Yevon, in creating sin, may have taken inspiration, consciously or not, from Bevel's failed superweapon. Regardless, the summoner forces proved to be inferior to the ever-expanding power of Machina. Summoner Yevon, ruler of Zanarkand, turns the surviving citizens of Zanarkand into faith. When we finally reach the peak of Mount Gagazet and witness the vast wall of faith, countless souls sealed into the stone, we finally get a reliable glimpse into Zanarkand's true past. Up until now, everything we've known about the city has been through the distorted lens of Dream Zanarkand, as seen through Tidus and Jecht. While the dream preserves Zanarkand's golden age, a deeper and more unsettling question lingers. Why did so many people willingly sacrifice their lives to sustain Yevon's vision? This idea is expanded on further in Final Fantasy X 2.5, where Zanarkand's population is depicted as almost cult-like in their unwavering devotion to Yevon and Yunalesca, referred to only by their titles, the Mage of Zanarkand and the Summoner Princess. From this, we begin to see a society shaped by absolute loyalty and blind faith, not unlike real-world cults such as Scientology. Using the power of these faith, Yevon summons Dream Zanarkand, the memory of Zanarkand. He himself becomes Yu Yevon and creates the first sin. Yevon's ability to command absolute loyalty from his surviving followers speaks to the deep psychological and ideological grip he had over the people of Zanarkand. However, there's reason to believe that this influence may have not been purely ideological. It might have been magical in nature. While this is never explicitly confirmed, Final Fantasy X 2.5 repeatedly suggests that powerful magic users possess the ability to manipulate the minds of the masses, raising the possibility that Yevon's control ran even deeper than mere devotion. This also presents a very different form of summoning compared to the Aeons of the Summoner's Pilgrimage. Instead of channeling a faith sacrifice to call forth an Aeon, the faith of Mount Gagazet sustain an unending dream, a perfect recreation of Zanarkand at its peak. Rather than a temporary manifestation of power, this is a summoning of an entire city, preserved indefinitely through the will of countless souls. It's worth noting that Dream Zanarkand doesn't seem to reflect the true nature of Zanarkand as a summoner-led kingdom. Tidus arrives in present-day Spira with no knowledge of summoners or guardians, suggesting that these concepts never existed in the dream version of his home. Unlike historical Zanarkand, where figures like Len fought on the front lines as summoners, Dream Zanarkand appears completely devoid of magic. This raises an intriguing possibility. Was Yevon's vision of a perfect Zanarkand one without summoning at all? Looking deeper, this actually makes sense when considering that the people of Dream Zanarkand seem to have some level of agency. If they possessed the ability to become faith and summon for themselves, it could threaten the stability of the dream, and possibly even sin itself. If another figure like Yu Yevon emerged in the dream, capable of creating a similar creature, it might unravel the entire cycle that Yevon worked so hard to maintain. Speaking of sin, the second half of Yevon's summoning is its creation. Yu Yevon forges sin with himself at its core, using gravity magic to pull together dense concentrations of pyreflies, forming a kind of programmable armor. The purpose of this monstrous being is singular: to protect Dream Zanarkand at all costs. To that end, Sin annihilates any civilization that grows too large or too advanced, and mercilessly destroys anyone who ventures too close to the hidden city. Dream Zanarkand, meanwhile, exists suspended along a mysterious levitating water stream, perhaps better understood as a dense concentration of pyreflies, or even an extension of the far plane itself. This stream carries the Dream City far out into the ocean, where it floats in secret while Sin endlessly patrols its perimeter. If you look closely, you can even spot this levitating stream in the game's opening scene, as Sin destroys Dream Zanarkand, a subtle detail that, on subsequent playthroughs, rewards sharp-eyed players with a satisfying moment of realization. Starting with the abandoned city of Zanarkand and Bavel, Sin destroys the Machina civilizations. This idea is reinforced throughout the game, as every ruin the party encounters on their pilgrimage is accompanied by Wakka's unwavering disdain for the lost Machina civilizations. Yet, despite Sin's relentless destruction, Bavel managed to survive and reforge itself under the tenets of the growing Yevon faith. According to Yevonite teachings, Sin's attacks are divine punishment for the decadence of the fallen cities. But for Titus, the truth is far more devastating. His beloved Zanarkand was never spared. The real city was wiped out long ago, and the only version that remains is nothing more than a dream. The citizens of Bavel at that time think that what Yevon summoned from the Zanarkand faith is sin, and that Sin going around destroying everything is a sign of Yevon's violent anger. The Yevonites were close to the truth, but not entirely correct. Realizing that Zanarkand was no match for Bavel's military might, Yevon chose to preserve it, not physically, but as an unending dream sustained by the faith. Sin, however, was summoned through a very different method. Unlike an Aeon, it wasn't born from a faith sacrifice, but instead created with Yevon himself as its core. This raises an interesting question. Does summoning truly apply in Sin's case? While the term is debatable, I think the ambiguity itself is worth exploring. After all, summoning is rooted in magic. Where we draw the line between summoning magic and other forms of magic is all that really matters for this argument. And in the end, Sin isn't so different from Aeons in one key way: it follows the will of its master. Yunalesca, a summoner from Zanarkand, turns her husband Zayon into a faith and destroys Sin with the final summoning. She remains on Spira as an unsent. Yunalesca, the daughter of Yevon and sole surviving summoner of Zanarkand, becomes the first summoner to defeat Sin. Zayon, her guardian and husband, becomes the first final summon. Or does he? Final Fantasy X 2.5 reveals that the final summoning is distinct from the traditional summoning we see throughout the pilgrimage, where faith remains sealed in stone. Instead of calling upon a dormant faith, this summoning relies on a deeply personal bond, one rooted in love. Not necessarily romantic love, but the profound connection between a summoner and their guardian. Through this bond, the summoner transforms their guardian into a powerful Aeon. This form of summoning was once more common among elite summoners and their guardians in ancient Spira. In Bavel, at least, guardians would even take on the names of the gods from the old pantheon, becoming immensely powerful Aeons, uniquely tied to their summoner. Unlike the faith we encounter in the present day, these guardians never become eternal statues, suggesting a different, perhaps more personal form of sacrifice. So while it is true that Zayon became the first final Aeon to defeat Sin, the term final summoning itself only holds meaning in a world where this technique is used specifically for that purpose. In reality, the method behind it, the transformation of a guardian into a powerful Aeon, was far more common in the past. Back in the so-called good old days, this was simply another form of summoning, not the desperate last resort it would become later. Unlike traditional summoning, where a faith sacrifices themselves to become the core of an Aeon, the final summoning reverses this dynamic. The summoner is the one who dies in the process. In this way, the burden of sacrifice shifts from the faith to the summoner, marking a grim departure from earlier summoning practices. As the first to perform this rite, Yunalesca becomes an unsent and lingers in the ruins of Zanarkand, awaiting those who complete their pilgrimage, so she can pass on the knowledge of the final summoning. Yunalesca and Zayon are the only ones to escape during the fall of Zanarkand. She uses the final summoning with the knowledge that it will not fundamentally solve anything. Yunalesca's true motives are never fully explained. While Machen suggests that she played a role in shaping the Yevon faith, the Ultimania Omega states that she only learned of its existence from the pilgrims who ventured to the ruins of Zanarkand. Upon discovering them, she found their beliefs aligned with her own, ideals that notably seem to reflect the cult-like values of Yevon Zanarkand as described in Final Fantasy X 2.5. This raises an interesting possibility. Perhaps Yevon originally intended Sin as a means of control, a last-ditch effort to ensure Zanarkand's victory over Bevelle. But in the end, Sin proved too powerful even for its creator. Unable to maintain control, Yevon's mind shattered, leaving only Yunalesca to carry the fanatical vision of Cult Zanarkand in his place. The survivors start work on the reconstruction of Spira, focusing on Bevelle. At this point, the Temple of Yevon Faith hasn't fully taken hold, and with Sin temporarily gone, the surviving Spirans believe their troubles are finally over. Bevelle, now free from the looming threat, is rebuilt into the grand city that still stands in present-day Spira. Given its scale and architectural complexity, it's hard to imagine Bevelle as anything but a Machina-powered city. After all, such an ambitious reconstruction would have almost certainly required the use of construction Machina, despite the Faith's later condemnation of such technology. The second Sin appears publicly with Yunalesca's final Aeon, Zaon, as its core. It destroys the remaining Machina civilizations. Just kidding, Spirans. Turns out you're totally f***ed. Sin comes back, and this time Yevon feeds on Yunalesca's final Aeon in order to keep Sin powered as its core. We later learn that in order to destroy Sin permanently, Yuna has to sacrifice all of her Aeons, while also defeating the final Aeon core of Sin, and lastly, destroying Yevon within Sin, who maintains the spell that regenerates Sin. Because Sin attacks Machina civilizations, there is a widening trend of people abandoning Machina. The true rejection of Machina begins with the return of Sin. While most of Spira turns away from technology in fear of provoking another attack, the Al-Bhed, the very inventors of Machina, continue their work, developing new machines while excavating and restoring old ones. Already viewed with suspicion by the rest of Spira, the Al-Bhed become even further ostracized as the New World Order solidifies around the belief that forsaking Machina is the only way to prevent Sin's wrath. However, their influence remains somewhat muted at this stage. Not everyone is entirely convinced of the temple's efficacy, and the living memory of Yevon and Yunalesca, particularly among those who fought against them in the war with Bevelle, may still be too fresh for blind devotion to take hold. The temple's dominance is coming, but for now it's merely planting the seeds of what will one day become absolute control. The Yevon Temple adds the concept that sin is a punishment for people's sins into its doctrine. At the same time, it spreads the story that the calm will arrive with the use of the final summoning. The Yevon Temple's doctrine takes shape around three key ideas: the promise of safety through rejecting Machina, the burden of guilt placed on those who waged the Machina wars, and the hope of a temporary calm, a fleeting peace like the one that followed Lady Yunalesca's first defeat of Sin. These tenets provide a way for Yevon's followers to rationalize Sin's relentless destruction while also praying for atonement. Life without Machina will undoubtedly be harder, but they are told it's the price for safety. By repenting and forsaking technology, they can supposedly avoid Sin's wrath. At the same time, they gain a convenient scapegoat. Those who still use Machina, or even those who used it in the distant past, can be blamed for their continued suffering. And finally, the idea that Sin can be defeated, even if only for a short time, gives the people something to cling to, however fleeting that hope may be. With these three things, Yevon's grip on Spira has begun. This concludes the section of Spiran history from approximately 1,000 years ago. Next up is the history of Spira, approximately 800 years ago, or if you missed the timeline dating back 3,000 years ago, that video is appearing on screen right now.